This is Democracy Watch. Marc, with Election Day now upon us, let's discuss the imminent threats of stunts that Donald Trump could pull here. So what's at the top of your priority list in terms of what to look out for?
Don't believe anything Donald Trump tells you, okay? Donald Trump is a liar. Donald Trump lies about everything. Now is not the time to start listening to what Donald Trump says and believing him. He is going to say that he won the election. He's going to say that the ballots, that every ballot that wasn't for him was fraudulent. He's going to claim that he won every state. Like, he's going to say the same preposterous things that he says about electric boats and sharks and his accomplishments. All of those same lies he's going to say about the outcome of this election. So tune him out. Don't let him stress you out. And above all, don't believe a word he says.
Now, Trump and his allies lost more than 60 lawsuits after the 2020 election, and yet still, to this day, he maintains the lie that he was contending with all of this fraud and that actually he won the election. So the question here is, knowing that this is going to happen again, how does that inform what's going to happen around him? How does that inform how these court cases will be handled? How does that inform how you'll do your work? Like he's going to stay the same. So, and if everybody else stays the same, then nothing changes, and we're in the same big lie mess that actually led to an insurrection. So how is that going to inform the difference that we're going to see as it relates to everybody who's not Donald Trump?
Look, I think there are three pieces to this. The first, as you say, is what does it mean for Donald Trump? Like, how are the people around him? I think the people around him are more sycophantic than they were in 2020.
Right.
I think they are more competent, but don't confuse competence with independence. He had a bunch of sycophants around him who did crazy things in 2020, but he has purged from his orbit all of the people who spoke up for democracy and stood up for democracy so bravely leading up to and on January 6th. So I think that the level of malevolence on the Trump side is greater than we expected and greater than we saw in 2020. I think on the Harris side, on the Democratic side, I think that there is a clear-eyedness. I mean, we were pretty clear-eyed about him in 2020, but I think there's an even greater clear-eyedness of what he is willing to do. And the fact that he and the RNC have been filing so many lawsuits in advance of Election Day have pretty much given away their game plan, right? Yeah. So there's no, remember when we were at this date in 2020, there had never been an election with a post-election with dozens and dozens of frivolous lawsuits filed. We've now been through that experience, and so we know to expect it and we know how to prepare for it. I think the real wild card, Brian, is the third piece, which you didn't mention, which is the media. And so, let me say a word to members of the mainstream media who might be watching this video. You all speak a lot about the importance of democracy and democratic institutions. You talk about eloquently all the time about the role of the free press, and that is a vital part of a democratic system. But the free press also has an obligation to other parts of the system. And all too often we have seen the media, in an effort to be even-handed, create a false equivalency. And it is vital that in this period we are entering into, you not allow that to happen. When Donald Trump tells lies, don't cover them. When you have to cover them, open up by saying he is lying and then end by pointing out he is lying. Do not allow this to become a back and forth between people who Donald Trump has sent to your networks to spew misinformation and then someone else who is there to tell the truth. You really, really need to be serious about your obligation to democracy, because I think a lot of this, Brian, will rest in how the public experiences the information, and a lot of that will be mediated still through the mainstream media.
I could not agree more. And actually, the reason I didn't mention it initially was because I was going to give that its own question here. But the fact is that a lot of what Republicans are looking to do, by virtue of hoping to throw this thing into a contingent election and object when the electoral votes are handed down to certify on January 6, 2025, is going to be reliant on being able to say that there was fraud, and being able to say that there was fraud is that unto itself is reliant on people believing the stories that Republicans are already perpetuating right now. And so to your exact point, the media has a massive obligation right now to cover these stories accurately, because if they just act as a megaphone for Republicans' unfounded claims of fraud that they're already, again, perpetuating right now, then people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley are going to cling on to those and use those as a justification to be able to try and object to the election results, throw this thing into a contingent election, and overturn the results. And it'll be by using the unwitting partners in the media if they're not doing their jobs as effectively as they should be doing it.
Yeah, and so I'll give you a good example. Donald Trump, within the last few days, said at a rally that he won the New Mexico election for president in 2016 and 2020. He lost in 2016 by 7 points. He lost in 2020 by 11 points. That in and of itself should be front page news. Okay, let's just say, could you, if you had a situation in which Joe Biden had said he had won the state of Alabama twice, or once, there'd be all these stories about how it's a sign of mental decline, right, and it would dominate the news, right? So number one, there's already a double standard. But here is the thing. You don't need to look back to 2020 to see that Donald Trump lies about election results. He is lying about election results today. So when he lies about election results the day after the election, just remember that a few days earlier, he said he won New Mexico, right, when he lost by 11 points. He had said earlier this year that he won Minnesota. He lost Minnesota by 7 points. Okay, so it is important to contextualize that he lies about election results all the time. He lied about the California election results. And so the media has a real obligation here and a real duty to, an opportunity here to really do right by the American people.
Right. Just because Donald Trump says something at a podium somewhere the day after the election does not make those words sacrosanct. In fact, it makes them the exact same brand of lie that he's telling right now that isn't even being covered largely. So just as easily as we should discard the lies that he's saying today, we have to come out and make sure that they're discarding those lies and revealing those lies for what they are when he says it at a podium as some official edict in the aftermath of the election. Marc, I know people's minds will immediately jump to the Supreme Court here. Could the Supreme Court ultimately be able to weigh in at any point in this process?
Sure. I mean, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the country, and it is always possible that a case goes to this U.S. Supreme Court. I do want people to keep in mind a few things. The first is that the Supreme Court actually doesn't hear a lot of cases. It hears relatively few cases. And in 2020, in fact, there were cases that Donald Trump tried to bring to the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court didn't take. So the Supreme Court doesn't have to take cases. The Supreme Court can pick and choose which cases it wants to get involved in. People who ask about the Supreme Court are usually, their frame of reference is one of two things. Either number one, they think about Florida in 2000, or they just have a general anxiety about the composition of the Supreme Court today. So let me say a word about the first and then a word about the second. Florida 2000, as wrongly decided as I believe it was at the time, and I continue to harbor doubts about it, you had the entirety of the election hinged on the outcome in one state, the state of Florida, where the number of votes separating the two candidates numbered in the hundreds. Okay, not in the thousands, not in the tens of thousands, in the hundreds. Just a few more than 500 votes separated Bush and Gore from one another. And so the ability of the U.S. Supreme Court to have an outcome determinative ruling, which they did in that case, hinged on the fact that it was one state only and that it was so narrowly close. That is an unusual event in American history, that the election is that close in a single deciding state. Could happen again, but that is context for Florida. In terms of the overall tenor and composition of the court, there is no one who has been more vocal and expressed concern about some of the Supreme Court's decisions around voting and Donald Trump. The ruling that they had giving him immunity was wrong from start to finish, in my view. Their recent ruling in Virginia, where they allowed Glenn Youngkin to make a spectacle over removing 1,600 registrants from the rolls because he believes they're non U.S. citizens, when it appears now at least some of them are U.S. citizens. I think that was an unforced error or maybe an intentional error on the part of the Supreme Court, and certainly something that heightens people's anxiety. But again, I come back to this. If the most important thing people can do right now is not worry about what the Supreme Court may or may not do in some hypothetical case that may or may not ever get to them. The most important thing people can do right now is to make sure they vote. At this point, it is too late to vote by mail. So if you're planning on vote by mail, put it in a Dropbox or else vote in person, because it's not going to get to it's not likely. If you put it in the U.S. Postal Service, it'll get in on time. If there's still early vote available, do that. But otherwise, show up on Election Day. So what I want you to do right now with the time that you are going to spend worrying about the U.S. Supreme Court is I want you to look up online where your local polling place is. And I want you to do that even if you think where it is, where you know where it is, because these things change over time. And I also want you to look up what the hours are. You may think you know what the hours are, but hours change. And I want you to sketch out in your mind or on paper what time of day you're going to go to vote and how you're going to make sure you have sufficient time to complete the voting process. Because the biggest thing we can do right now is have confidence that if everyone votes, that Kamala Harris will win. If everybody votes, Hakeem Jeffries will be the next speaker. If everybody votes, Chuck Schumer will remain the Senate Majority Leader. If everybody votes, state houses and ballot measures that are critical to the future of this country will all succeed. So focus on that. And I promise you there will be lawyers and activists and campaigns who are going to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, and in the end they'll succeed.
And by the way, I should note that foremost among them is going to be you and your team. So for people watching right now, to support the work that Marc's going to be doing that will very literally protect democracy here, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. It's also going to be an especially important resource that we have right now as he and his firm continue to engage in a lot of what promises to be a litigious post-election period. So I'll put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Everybody, again, one last note here in what will be the final episode before Election Day. Please make sure to make your voices heard and vote in this election. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.